Welcome back to the Rugby Rundown on a Tuesday. I'm still on holiday, as you can see. Jan, nice to have you again. We've got lots to talk about. You published an article this morning in Rugby 365 about Rassie's true genius, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I think it is apt to talk about the ticket situation at Ellis Park. All is not as it seems to be. Talk to me about that.
Yes, MV, thank you for having me again on this podcast. I really enjoy this. This is where I can spill my guts, so to speak. And to me, yes, I had a lot of discussions, should I say, or communication with SARU and the media department, and I had some interesting replies. The one thing that I noticed, there were two things that I need to speak about. The statement they put out on Friday about how untrue, factually inaccurate our reports were, which is part of their smoke and mirrors campaign. And then also the 52,000 they said that were there on Saturday. So I have the following two questions for SARU, and I will reach out to them and ask them these two questions. How many of those 52,000 tickets were sold after they slashed the prices? Because it was severely slashed. I mean, your 900 Rand ticket was for 600 or 950 Rand ticket was 650 Rand, and everything was slashed. So how many, the surge in sales was, how much of that was after the prices drop, the drop in price? And then also, I know for a fact that a number of tickets, a substantial number of tickets were given away for free. So the guys who paid full price, if you paid 3,000 Rand, you're going to be miffed, because I have at least 10 family members who I personally know that received free tickets. They went to Ellis Park. I mean, on a Saturday morning, you decide, I've got free tickets, I'm going to Ellis Park. And they went. So they didn't pay for the tickets, they went for free. So how many of those, so my question to, how many and who gave those tickets away, and how many of them were given away? I suspect some of this were the corporates or whatever tickets, but SARU, to me, SARU still, I know there's this fight with the suite holders at Loftus game, and we'll discuss that now, but SARU is busy with smoke and mirrors, and unless they give us straight answers, which they're not. I mean, that three paragraph statement they put out on Friday was definitely not, that was just covering their tracks. And like I say, and I'll use the term again, it was just smoke and mirrors, because I know, because on Thursday when I did another follow-up article about the slash prices, I could check on the booking agencies, and I could check that there were at least, if you ask how many tickets in this block, how many tickets, you could quickly work out that there was about 30,000 tickets still available. So they had sold roughly 30,000, say 32,000 by Thursday. So I suspect maybe they sold 35, maybe 40, who knows? I don't know how many tickets, because if they tell us how many they were sold when they slashed the prices, it'll give us a better idea. But they were definitely, that statement was definitely smoke and mirror. So my question to SARU is, how many tickets were really sold after the drop in prices, and how many tickets were given away, and who gave it away? Because I know for a fact, because I have family members, at least 10 family members that had tickets. So if you get a group of 10 or a packet of 10 tickets that goes into the open market for free, imagine the oak that pays 3,000 Rand and sits next to you in the stand and find out that you got there for free. He's going to be very miffed.
No, that's they said the president now. There's an Afrikaans saying, jy het 'n lat vir jou eie gat gepluk. That translates, I don't know how to translate.
And that's a big one. That's a big one. Yeah. So they just need to be honest. They right from the outset, they needed to say to the public, be transparent. Say, listen, we maybe overestimated the ticket prices. We are working on a solution, and leave it at that. But be honest. Don't pretend, come on a Friday when you know that you suddenly had a surge in sales because you slashed the prices. And then people started giving tickets away. Now you say, oh, woo, look at, we're going to have a lot of people there. So, yeah, they said their goal was 90% of ticket sales, of capacity. 52,000 is not exactly 90%, but it's pretty close. So if they want to spin it, they can say, oh, we did get close to our goal of 90%. But in reality, they got there because they slashed the prices and then gave tickets away for free.
The thing is, they've now set the precedent, like I said earlier, and they've now vehemently denied that they will ever do that again. But if they overestimated Loftus, they've overestimated Durban, and going forward, the All Blacks are a different story because most of those games have sold out. All of them are sold out, as far as I know. But the point is, they are going to have to do the same thing, and people are just going to wait it out. And that's not the only thing.
Yeah.
We see now that Loftus's suite holders are up in arms, but they paid for it and now they can't use it. I'm not sure why Loftus specifically is so upset. I know that they've been upset for a bit now. What's the story there?
Yeah.
Do you know?
I don't know exactly what it was. I knew that previously the Loftus owners had, but this is all related to the fact that Saru takes it, and they want to sell the suite tickets to the Loftus owners at inflated prices, you know. And these guys don't want to pay. I mean, if you pay 10,000 Rand for your ticket and it initially said, I have access to a test, and you now suddenly they tell you, no, you're going to pay another 10,000 Rand for your ticket. Then suddenly, you know, to pay 20,000 Rand for one extra game, I can imagine why they were upset. So I know that the Bulls officials are reluctant to talk to us, certainly publicly talk to us, because they have to work with Saru again somewhere down the line. You know, they don't want to start a fight with Saru. But this relates to the fact that Saru took over the test match. The test match host agreement was taken away from the unions, and Saru now runs the test matches. So they pay the union, the Blue Bulls, a fee to rent or hire the stadium for the day, and they insist on a clean stadium, which means no Bulls advertising. So Saru do all the advertising, and I see the Bulls. The important thing is the Bulls have got a new set of lights. I'm not sure they're bragging about their new lights. I'm not sure if that's because Saru did it for a test or the Bulls are doing it themselves. So good on them. So there's something that they're doing well. So I think, you know, the fact is this thing about Saru's test host format is going to be a sore point of discussion and a debate for a long time coming, because all the unions, unless you're in Saru's pocket, your suite holders will draw the short end of the stick.
We spoke to Hugo Kemp a little while ago on this channel. He's the Chief Operations Officer of the Bulls, and we talked about the lights. The Bulls are putting those lights up themselves because there's been rugby by candlelight for quite a bit now. They desperately needed new lights. I saw them putting it up. It was quite an adventure getting those lights up there, that high up. But I'm looking forward to see it change colors and everything, so it's quite fancy. It should last a couple of years, so well done to the Bulls. This has got nothing to do with Saru as far as I know. So I'm looking forward. This whole model of the SA Rugby taking over the hosting, call it that, and pocketing the money, I know it's causing cash flow problems to the unions, because it was a big part of the income, and now suddenly it's gone. And you know, you would have had so much money in your bank account at the start of the season that's no longer there. And it's going to, you know, just never mind the 12-month season for players, the 12-month season for the unions. Anyway, that's on the back foot. Let's talk about your article that you published this morning in Rugby 365. I'll put the link up on the screen here and also down in the description. People can go read it. But your article goes about the true Rassie genius, the true genius of Rassie. Let me rephrase that. And, you know, that might be a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but it still rings true. What did you say there?
Yeah, to me, the people, you know, Rassie's got this thing that he's created. So I think we just got to take a step back. When Rassie arrived, we were number 6 in the world. We were declining. I mean, and I'm not criticizing Alistair or anything, but I need to point out that he had a 33% record the first year, and then he had a win record, and then it went up to about close to 50%. But our ranking slipped to number 6, which had people up in arms, and it had people burning jerseys and stuff. When Rassie came back, he made a point of saying he doesn't want the fans to burn their jerseys. He wants to create a culture where people love. So he's created that culture. The players believe, the players are bought in, and Rassie has taken us to number 1. So he's now on a 10-match winning streak. We haven't lost a match since September last year. I think our last loss was against the All Blacks in Auckland. So, but Rassie himself is on a 10-match winning streak. You know, one of them includes the Barbars game, which is a non-cap game, but still 10-match winning streak. And so everybody looks at these numbers and how great, and they're great. I mean, it's wonderful. I think what people are missing is what Rassie is doing with the team. So part of this article points out that, and Rassie said that he mentioned in passing, and very few people picked up on it, in his post-match press conference after the England win. He said they are without 8. You sit up and hold on a second. And then he started mentioning them, Eben is out, Loot is out, Franco is out, Riley is out, Salman Murat is out, then there's Venter, the Lions flank lock that Rassie wants to turn into a number 4 lock utility like Peter Steff. I'm not talking off the top of my head, but the other 2 is in all 8 is in the article. So when Rassie mentioned this, it made me sit up and think. And then I went and did a bit of research and looked at things. And one of the things that we've got 8 locks out. We still got enough depth. So on Saturday against Scotland, Rowan Orkeel will start at lock, and Cobus Wiese, the 2 Bulls locks for the last few years, or for this past season at least. They're the starting pair. And then people say, oh, but we haven't got lock cover on the bench. Actually, we got 3 players on the bench, all 3 loose forwards, who can all play lock and have played lock. So Ben Jason Dixon can play lock. He came on at the weekend against England, and he had a stunning game. I thought he really cemented his place in the Bok team. He had a really good game. Vincent Tutuka has played lock, can play number 4 lock. He's played number 4 lock for the Sharks, and he's a loose forward. And then Elrich, I know very few people will know, but he's had outings at lock. It's not. He's a loose forward, but he can play lock. So you've got lock on the bench, and that's a real genius. When people look at the team, it's a 6-2 split on the bench, and they will look at all sorts of numbers, and they miss the real genius of Rassie, is how he deals with what people see as a crisis. Rassie sees as an opportunity, and that to me is the real genius of Rassie. Is he creates opportunities out of what other people see as crisis. Yes, we've got an injury situation at lock. We've got a problem at lock, but other people get opportunities. Cobus Wiese might have a blinder on Saturday, and suddenly he's the next number 4 lock. So and I think that's where Rassie is really good, and people don't quite, and people often miss the point that Rassie does all these things in the background, and then they just look at the team and, oh, is Manie playing again? Or no, why is Andre Pollard playing again? And then they miss all the real things, and then because we know Scotland's got a heck of a pack. They're going to give us a run for our money up front. So, Russia's got a pack which I believe can overcome Scotland on Saturday.
The interesting thing was that most of the away teams won this weekend in the Nations Championship. Scotland beat Argentina. Okay, Argentina never had a game before. All their players had to come back to Argentina. I understand all that, but I mean, still, Ireland beat Australia. France didn't beat the All Blacks, but came pretty damn close. That's an interesting phenomenon. But talking about the genius of Rassie, it's also couched in the comfort of knowing that even if he slips up a little bit, he's going to be forgiven. Because people say, "No, Rassie's experimenting." If we maybe, for argument's sake, lost against England with that sort of a makeshift team, with those last-minute changes, people would have forgiven it and said, "Yeah, okay, but maybe just try this and that and the other." That comfort zone might not be around forever. Or do you think he's got a bit of a runway in that?
I think Russia is busy creating people, and yes, I understand that one loss could change the sentiment towards Russia. That's just the nature of the Springbok fans. We all just want to win. We think we're invincible. When I was 16, I thought I was invincible. I still think I'm invincible, but I know that I'm getting older. So yes, there comes a time when you have to. You're gonna run into a wall, and the wall's not going to give way. So. But Rassie is still building towards the World Cup. And I think he's also building towards 2031. That's why all these young players are coming through. And I think we'll see a less rotation next year. But this year, Rassie's already said it. And that to me is the other geniuses. Like you said, people were going to say, oh, he can be forgiven because he's doing this and we're winning and we're still number 1. I think he's going to keep doing it, even if we do slip up somewhere. And he's going to create depth that if something happens ahead of the World Cup next year, he's got depth. He will know if Cobus Wiese can slot in suddenly. If Jean Klein, that's the other guy that's injured. If Jean Klein doesn't come back, Cobus Wiese could play that role. That he comes off the bench as a muscle or the big bulky player, a strong carrier. So he's got all that sort of stuff that he's busy planning, and he's creating that depth. And I think that's the part with what people often miss is what Rassie is doing. The bigger, they don't see the bigger picture of that Rassie is painting.
Well, okay, you've got 8 locks out injured, and imagine this happened next year, just before the World Cup. The issue is why? Why are 8 locks injured? What's causing this? That 12-month season and everything else. So we've got a bit of a luxury to experiment a bit and build more depth, like you just said. But if we do the same thing for the next 12 months and we end up in a similar situation next year, we might have a problem. What do you think is causing it, and what do you think are they planning to do about it? Looks like. I mean, it's now July. We're waiting with bated breath for SA Rugby's sort of review. We know they're not going to withdraw from the Champions Cup, but they have to make a plan somehow, because they also have to wrap these players in cotton wool a bit.
Yeah. So the problem is, and that's another point which some journalists, and I'm not criticizing, everybody's doing their job. And if they got a source that they refer to and they trust the source, and the source gave them an info, and they run with it. We all do that. I read the room that day when Mark Alexander and Riaan was talking. And to me, the body language was clear. Certain people always come to the table with the same thing and we start over. And we know the two countries that are dead set against the Suns are moving to the European window. Suns are moving to the February, having the Rugby Championship in February and March. That's New Zealand and Australia. They want to have it there because they've got a break over December and January. So that's when their players rest. We need to find a break because we're playing in the Northern Hemisphere. We need to find a break in August, September, or September, October. We need to find that 2-month break there. So we want to move the Rugby Championship to February, March. And I think the hint that Mark Alexander dropped that people missed was that he was suggested that they've already walked away from Sansa in the Super Rugby, and they showed they're not scared. So the next question is, where do the Springboks play? How do we entertain them? How do we keep them? That's probably part of the discussions that they are having now in July. What is alternatives? What can they set up? Will a competition against Argentina, Japan, and Fiji or whatever suffice? And leave New Zealand and Australia to play 10 Bledisloe Cup matches during the Rugby Championship? I've already seen what happened to the Super Rugby once the Springboks were gone. So I think if the Springboks call their bluff, they'd be very quick to maybe change their minds.
Well, how soon will it happen? Let's say, for argument's sake, New Zealand and Australia now suddenly agree to move the Rugby Championship. Will it move next year already, or is it too late? And that comes back to how do we protect this players?
No, this is going to. Most of these contracts are in place still, including the Champions Cup and our Northern Hemisphere, I think, place till 2030. So any changes will come 2031, the next World Cup cycle, after the next World Cup cycle. So I suspect these discussions is stuff for long term. So this 12-month season problem we're going to have for the next few years still. So there's a realistic chance that we're going to have some injuries next year with players being overplayed. That's part of the problem we have, and that's one of the issues we have to sort out or SARA has to sort out in terms of where do they find rest. Just haphazardly resting the players in the middle of a season, February and March, to give the players a 6-week break is not doing the franchises any good. So, on the one end, you're now compromising the franchise. You want them to be competitive in Europe, but they can't be competitive because, as we've spoken previously, Johan Ackermann's not going to have his Springboks until at least December. So he's going to be without his Springboks until at least December. So he's got. John Dobson's the same. Mm-hmm. The Sharks will have a few. Well, even Etzebeth doesn't even play anymore. So there's a problem. I seriously think there's a problem. So they're alienating their franchises on two fronts. Firstly, they overplay. They're forcing them to overplay their Springboks, and then forcing them to compromise their own campaigns to rest those Springboks. And then also they're alienating by taking the money, the big income stream, the best income stream away from them, because they want to, so this money that SARU makes, the other question you can rightfully ask is, this money that SARU makes, how much of that goes back to the unions to make up for the money they lose by not losing test income? So, SARU might be sitting pretty, and they might be able to say, we had 52,000 people at Ellis Park, but how much of that goes back, how much of that really is money, and how much of that profit, so-called profit, goes back to the franchises so that they can supply another batch of Springboks to the national team?
You raise an interesting point here. I've had several discussions with certain senior members of management of the unions, and one thing that I was told was, for example, a round of 16 game overseas makes more money than a UFC final at home. So if you can get your franchises up to strength and they can actually compete in these overseas Champions Cup, Challenge Cup finals, supposedly most Champions Cup, they can make up the lost income. They're losing, with the test model that's now changed, but they're not allowed to have their players. That's a bit of a catch-22, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's part of the problem that SARU is creating by forcing the players to forcing them to rest. And because they have also remember they haven't had the frontline players, the Springboks, because Russia's got 46 players in his squad. That's apart from the guys who are injured and not in the squad. So, you talk about at least another 10 players. So you got, let's say 50 players. So every franchise is at least 10, 12 players missing. Well, not every franchise. The Lions is less.
On average.
So, yeah, on average. But let's say the other three, Sharks, Bulls, and you're talking about 12, 13 players per franchise that's missing. Even more, 15 perhaps, and then the Lions fill up the gap, and a couple of overseas players and so on. But the reality is that the franchises have to start a campaign without their main players and then still rest their players during the season and then are expected to be competitive. It's unrealistic because they don't have the budget to compete. They can't go buy an RG Snyman or a Bone Venter. Well, the Lions have now got Bone Venter, but you can't go like Leinster does, go buy an RG Snyman and Rico Ahani to fill those gaps and let them play, and you have these international players that play for you while the other players in Ireland, because that's the type of player you need when your Springboks are away. So you've got that type of international standard player.
Right, let's talk about the rugby for a bit. Saturday's game against England, 2 late withdrawals, dropping the average age from 31 to 27. Still a fairly experienced side. Just briefly, before we talk about the team against Scotland, what was your impressions of that game? With the upsets and the upheavals, let's call it that, did they perform adequately? I thought it settled down a little bit in the second half when Ben Jason went to lock, like you mentioned earlier. Pieterse moved back to number 7 flank. I wonder if they shouldn't have started like that, maybe.
Yeah, not necessarily. I think Rassie had a specific game plan he wanted to play. And I think the big thing was the game plan works exactly like it did against Australia last year at Ellis Park. The same situation. Went up 17-0. We looked in complete control. And the players got overexcited and started the concentration drop because it was almost too easy for them. And then suddenly they allowed England to come back into the game. The big difference this time was that halftime, they had a good, it was 17-14 at halftime. They had a good chat, and Rassie obviously made changes, and the players, the team itself, unlike last year, didn't panic. So they showed that they can overcome, a lack of concentration. You can get focused again. You start getting your mind back in the game, and I think that's a big difference from last year. And so, yeah, I'm happy with. I think Rassie said better than adequate or something like that. I think it was a 70-80% performance. There were a lot of good things that we did, and to me, I think Manie had a good game. I think Manie, the fact that he doesn't have to kick, that he doesn't have to get the goal kicking in his head, he could focus on his general game, and that showed. So yeah, having Cheslin kicking and having Manie just be the fly off works. So there's little changes that Rassie does that people often miss. Cheslin Kolbe is not a 80-90% kicker, but he's adequate. And if you score more tries than the opposition, you don't have to kick all your goals. So yeah, I think it was. I would put it at 70-80% performance, and I think we're just too good for England. England's got a problem. They're a team in decline, and the fact that they had to leave Murray Itoje at home tells me there's something amiss in that team. And yeah, and they're also relying on some very senior players, and they haven't got depth coming through. So if you think of it, if England has to lose 8 of their frontline locks, What do they have?
Yeah.
You know, I don't watch a lot of Premiership, but what I do watch is the depth or the quality in terms of tight forwards in the Premiership is not as great. Their best prop in the Premiership was a Springbok, Thomas du Toit. You know, so it tells you a lot that you want to know about England's game, where their game is. You know, they've reduced their competition to a 10-team competition. You know, and then 8 of those 10 teams go straight into the Champions Cup, where they can't compete because they I mean, if you're 8th in the Premiership, you don't belong in the Champions Cup because that's a competition for a real Champions team. I mean, we had 3 teams this year, and only 2 of them were competitive in the Champions Cup or semi-competitive in the Champions Cup. I mean, the Lions struggled in the Challenge Cup, and then they focused on the URC, which was right. You know, now they're getting to the Champions Cup. Maybe they can attract a few more players and a few more sponsors. Although that seems unlikely if rumors are true that the sponsors are queuing at the exit door.
Or entry door. Well, we saw a couple of players making, Boeta Chamberlain coming back to the Lions now. He was at the Sharks and the Bulls, then Newcastle, Red Bull, now he's back at the Lions. Hiram Andrews, all these signings are not really big name signings. You would have expected a bit more fireworks. Buan Venter, basically the marquee signing, but yeah, we're not here to talk about the Lions. Talking about this coming weekend against Scotland, everybody's sort of dismissing it or whatever. But remember, Scotland beat England in the Six Nations. They finished higher than England in the Six Nations. They're supposedly actually a better team than England. Yes, we've been thinking that England is the big test. It's not. Scotland's going to be the big test, I would think. And Scotland beat Argentina this past weekend. Yes, now Scotland's got to travel to South Africa, adjust to the altitude and everything else. But the point is, we shouldn't underestimate this. And what is the fact that Rassie's made so many changes? It's effectively a completely different team, almost. Even Damon Willemse, who had a blinder at fullback, is now playing 12. Like I said earlier, lots of experimentation all the time. But are we not maybe, dismissing Scotland too early?
No, definitely not. I think the reality is Rassie had this planned out. He said before the England test, before they actually started prepping for the England test, I specifically asked him the question about, how much he's going to rotate. And he said he's going to continue to rotate for the rest of the year. So that was clear. He was going to continue to rotate for the rest of the year. I think I touched on it earlier as well. He's real genius. He's got a plan in place. So this plan, in that press conference, he also said to me that the players know who's going to play in which test. So this team has been preparing together. They've been together. So these guys knew before the England game that their run comes. So Pollard would have known, him and Ambrose would have known they're starting this test. So they can prepare for this test. Fassie would have known. He would have had Edwill. Jesse and Damien said Kane and Evan Roos knew, he was going to play. Now he's got Paul de Villiers there. Ruan and Quibus would have known that he was going to play in this game. Wilco would have known that, he had a bit of extra time to get into shape. Grobbies, we know, and Bone would have known, So Jan Hendrik knew he was going to play that dual role off the bench again. Mchunu knew he was going to play. Porthen knew he was going to be in both games. Ben Jason Dixon knew he was going to play off the bench in both games. Elrich, Grant Williams, Horn. So those players knew before the time what they were going to do. And the team will again change for Wales. It's going to change for Wales again. And people will say again 10 changes. Why? Because that's what Rassie planned. He knows exactly what he's doing. So I don't think he's underestimating Scotland. I think what he's doing is he's got a team that he thinks can beat Scotland comfortably. So we might play a bit more conservative game, and people are going to say, Andre Pollard can't play. Maybe that's Rassie's plan, because he knows that you don't run against Scotland. You don't run against Glasgow Warriors, because it's probably going to be the bulk of the team will be Glasgow Warriors in any event. So you don't make the mistake of running everything at them. You put them in their half, and then you pressure them with the defense, So those sort of plans were put in place before the season even started, and Rassie is just following the script, Yeah, will there be hiccups along the way, like losing Eben and Sia? Yeah, but Rassie's got a plan. He's going to fix it. And so, yeah, no, I don't think we're underestimating, to answer your question. No, we're not underestimating them. I think it's a plan that's in place and Russia is sticking to the plan. And that's why the players trust him. Because if you get told you're going to play in that game and suddenly Russia say, ooh, things didn't go lucky in that game. Maybe I want to give that guy another chance. No, I said to you, you're playing, you go play. You got to carry us this week.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've had a couple of people asking me, what do I think of this team? They feel that maybe a bit fragmented, sort of, back of a cigarette box kind of a team. I don't think so. It's a proper team. And most of them, or many of them, are Bulls playing at Loftus. Yeah. They're used to playing with each other.
To say, there's about 8 Bulls in that team. Let's quickly run through them. Kanan is there, Pollard, Ambrose, Ruan Orkeer, Kobus Wiese, Wilco Louw, Johan Grobler, Jan Hendrik. So yeah,
Eldrich.
And Eldrich is there as well. So I'm just going to share. I know it's not what you asked me, but I'm just going to share this with you. Willem Strauss, the president of the Blue Bulls Rugby Union, had a chirp about how many Bulls. I think 8 or 9 players in the Bulls team, and the Springboks and the Bulls in the Springbok team. Apologies. 9 players, 9 Bulls in the Springbok team. So I pointed out to him, but hold on a second. Ruan has left and Wilco has already left. So he said to me, no. I'm still paying their salary. So as long as I pay their salary, they're my players. So yeah, I mean, it's just a bit of humor, but that's Willem's dry sense of humor. I like it. I love it. So, but they played. The fact is, they played together. On a serious note, they played together this season. Everybody said, "What did they do?" They went and beat Glasgow. They played. Those guys played against Glasgow and they beat them in a semi-final away from home. So they're not going to be scared of these guys. They know these guys. They know how to beat them. They know that they can be physical enough and match up to them. So it comes back to the fact that Rassie knows what he's doing. And cliche as it might be, he's picking horses for courses because he thinks this is a combination that's best suited to beat Scotland.
Yeah, I agree. I want to just briefly, before we finish, talk about the All Blacks against the French team that was without many of their stars, most notably and unsurprisingly, Antoine Dupont wasn't there again. But I mean, Maxime Luku and Jalibert at 10, or 9-10, what a combination that is. They actually the Champions Cup champions. They played exceptionally well and they came pretty damn close. Do you think the All Blacks were maybe a bit not unprepared? I mean, this is the first game under Rennie. Had only 10 days to prepare with them. What do you ascribe to All Blacks? Almost losing it at home against a sort of let's call it a B-side French team, or was it just a matter of it's going to take some time to settle down?
Yeah, it's difficult to assess really on one game, but there were clear signs that they will be playing a more expansive game. They want to. But then you got to understand that if you play against quality teams, they're not going to allow you to just run around nilly-willy. This is not Super Rugby. Defense is still important. It's Test rugby. People is going to put pressure on you. So it worked in the early stages, and then the French got on, and the French started closing that. They started getting more aggressive on defense. The significant to me is that this French team was basically a Bordeaux team, the Champions Cup winners. So the bulk of the team was the Bordeaux team, and they had time to rest because they didn't play in the French top 14 final. So they had time to rest and prepare, and they went to New Zealand. And they're not a bad team. You don't become European champions if you're a bad team. So there's some really quality players in there. If you look at that French team. So you mentioned the scrum off, fly off now. They understand each other. They know exactly what they're doing, and they drove that French team, and they got them into positions. So, yeah, this French team is a very good team. We're going to be France at full. We're playing France in November in Paris. It's going to be a massive game. If we're still number one, imagine. Last year we beat them quite comfortably, but I think that it's going to be a different team in Paris this year.
Yeah. It also depends what type of game they're going to be playing. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, Jan, there's lots to talk about, but we'll do that next week again after this Scotland test. I'll be talking to Franco Smit today, later on. So any ideas, any questions, shoot me a message. I confirm. So I'm looking forward to that.
Ask Franco to talk Afrikaans to you. He loves talking Afrikaans.
No, I will. I definitely will. I'll throw in the occasional Afrikaans word, but still, I'm going to ask him about what he thought about the Springbok performance against Scotland. And also, now, like you just said, most of the Scotland team will be Glasgow Warriors. His players. I want to ask him about that. And obviously, he's not going to give away any secrets, but love to hear what he says.
Maybe if he thinks they'll move too far away from the Glasgow game plan, because I didn't see the Scotland Argentina game, so I don't know what type of game plan they played. But it'd be interesting to if he thinks the Scotland, because there's only two franchises in Scotland, so it's a bit like Italy. You know, they all the players know each other. They all play together, either for one of the two franchises, and when they get together, they sort of play the same game plan. So maybe that's something to touch on with Franco.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. We'll do it again next week.
Always. Thank you very much.